Hey everybody, and welcome back to another fun and exciting Algebra 1 class. Today's lesson is going to be a little different. I'm not really even going to do any math on the screen. I might do just a little bit, but for the most part, we're just going to be talking strategy. We're going to be reviewing some of the things that we've already done, and then you're just going to keep practicing it because that's what you need at this point. You need to figure out, okay, what method should I use? Because I have all these different methods, but then which one is best in which situation, and that will save you time. Because what I don't want is when you get to your homework or your quizzes or your test or ACT or whatever you're doing, I don't want you to get there and spend a bunch of time using the wrong method just to find out I can't solve it that way. One thing that's nice is that the quadratic formula is always the default. Like you can always default to that. And I know you're like, well, that's really long. There's a lot of steps there. Exactly. So there's other ways that you can do it faster. But the quadratic formula is always the one that you can default to and say, okay, if I can't figure it out any other way, I know that I can use the quadratic formula. All right, so let's take a look at this in your book. Page number 290, page 290, strategies for solving quadratics. So 4 methods for solving quadratics. We've already gone through them. So extracting the root, completing the square, factoring, and then using the quadratic formula. So which one should I use? So let's take a look at some of these. These are principles to follow or things to remember as we're doing this. Pure quadratics, and that's the one that doesn't have the what? Do you remember? It doesn't have the linear term. It doesn't have the x. It only has an x squared. It does not have an x. Those are the ones that you want to solve by extracting the root. Now, that's the one that one you really can't plug it into the quadratic equation because you can't plug in 0 to the quadratic equation. That's not going to work. So in the case that you don't have a linear term, solve it with extracting the roots. The easiest way to solve them. It solves just like a regular equation. And so if you see one with only an x squared, then go ahead and use that method. Factoring is fast, but only when factors can be found quickly. In other words, like I've said before in the last couple lessons, like if you have a leading coefficient, do not waste your time trying to factor that. Don't get a bunch of factors going and it's like then you figure out like I don't even know what I'm doing. So if it's easily factorable, it's about the easiest that you can get, especially if you know how to factor. So it's like, oh man, factoring's easy, so boom, I get this and I solve it and I've got them. That's the method I use the least because I don't even want to waste my time with factoring if I don't think I'm going to be able to solve it. And a lot of these you can't solve it by factoring. They don't come out evenly, so you just move on, okay? If you want to try to factor, that's fine. But a lot of times it does waste your time if you start with factoring because you find out pretty quickly, I can't factor this, and then you've got to go to a different method anyways. The next one would be completing the square. But remember, I told you this as well. Completing the square can save time over quadratic formula, but only when a equals 1. Again, if that leading coefficient, the a, is anything other than 1, skip it and go straight to the quadratic formula because you're going to save time because I mean it's just going to be a nightmare trying to do that. The other one is, do you remember how hard it was when b was a fraction? So I'm not going to scroll back there, but if you remember back to the completing the square, whenever b gave you a fraction, it became somewhat difficult to complete the square. If b is even, if you get an even number and it reduces out to 3 or something, well that's pretty easy to complete the square. So I would suggest completing the square if your b term is even. If it's odd, you definitely want to move on to the quadratic formula at that point. All right, so here is kind of a little diagram on the next page. This is page 291. Strategies for solving quadratics. So extracting the root, that's kind of what it looks like. Notice that there is no x term in this one. It's just an x squared, so we can use extracting the root. Factoring, you may look at this and go, I do not want to factor that. Look at all this. I would agree with you. I don't think that I would try factoring this. Now, I might because it might save me a little bit of time, but more than likely, if I see something with a 4x squared as the leading coefficient, I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure if I want to get into that. You could try it. It might be factorable, and you might save yourself a bunch of time. So you can use that. This was also the book called this the zero product property. Okay, so if you remember that one from the lesson, I think that was the third lesson that we did. So it's actually lesson 2 in the chapter, but it was the third video that we did. So if you want to go back and look at that one, you can. The zero um, product principle. So then we go to completing the square. And that's the one that we just did a couple lessons ago. And that's the one where you take half of the middle term. So whatever the middle term is, in this case, the middle term is 2. You take half of 2, and then you square that. So you square the 1, add it to both sides, and kind of go down. That's one that I told you you will have to work. You will have to be familiar with that. So don't totally skip that one. Don't be like, no, I'm just going to go straight to the quadratic formula every time. I mean, fine, you'll get the right answer, but don't short yourself on learning how to complete the square. You will have to learn how to complete the square in Algebra 2. You will have to learn it in trigonometry and all these other math classes. So I would suggest learning that now. And then the last one, obviously, here is quadratic formula. That's the dude that will solve anything that you plug into it. And you just kind of plug in the A, the B, and the C. Important thing there is to make sure that you get it into standard form before you write down your A, B, and C values, because if they're on the other side of the equal sign, you might be putting a negative instead of the positive 2. So we don't want you to make that mistake, because that will kick out a wrong answer every single time. All right, last thing for this lesson is what's called the discriminant. Now, it's not like discrimination or something like that. It's a math term. It's a special name, and here's what it is. It's given to the part of the quadratic equation that is under the radical sign. So when you write the quadratic equation, its square root sign, and then b squared minus 4ac. So this little piece right here, this b squared, what's underneath the radical sign, okay? This is called the discriminant right here. So there's a little hack right here that will kind of let you know how many real answers that you have. Remember, we have those extraneous roots sometimes that we get where it doesn't really, I mean, you get it in the answer, but it doesn't check. So this will help you as you go through this. So if your discriminant, if your piece underneath the radical sign comes out positive, then you will indeed get 2 real solutions. You don't even have to check those. Whatever you get, that's going to be your answer. Now, you might want to check them just to make sure that they're correct, but you don't have to check them to see if they're extraneous. If you get a 0 underneath the discriminant, so underneath the radical sign, then you only get 1 real solution. So you would have to go back and figure out, okay, which one is extraneous and which one is actually a part of the answer. If you get a negative answer coming out of the discriminant, and this should make sense because if we go back over here, if this is negative underneath here, remember, we talked about this. This equals what? This equals imaginary, okay? So an imaginary number is not real. So if you get a number that's coming out of the discriminant that's negative underneath that square root sign, then you will have no real answers, and that's right here. So no real solutions if that comes out negative. Normally, you're going to get 2 positives, you're going to get 2 answers. Possibly you're going to get a 0 under there and you're going to get only 1 solution. And then you also might get a negative number in there, which means you have no real solutions. Okay. And then you can see that there's a little kind of a explanation of when that happens. And then you can see it there. So kind of what that looks like. All right. Well, like I said, happy day for you. This is a short lesson, short video, and it's short because we want you to practice these. So now go into the practice section and just start working on these and try to come up with the correct answer. However you want to select it, use the tips that I just showed you. Remember, you can always use the quadratic formula. It's always a solution there. And so that might be your default one, but I would work on trying to figure out the other ones as well. Don't just skip to that every time. All right. That's all I've got for you. Hope you learned something. If you missed anything, slide it back, watch it again. We'll see you later. Have a good one. Bye bye.